Welcome to Ready for Mistakes. I'm your host, Jeff Smoody, and this is our second episode of what I've dubbed Season 5. If you guys listened to the previous episode, that was a conversation with Louis Abledinger. That actually was a conversation from 2024 that I never actually got around to publishing. So I was really happy to finally get that out into the world because it had been far too long, and it was a great conversation. And I enjoyed listening back to it to finish the edit 2 years after it had happened. So I hope you enjoyed that one. But I noted at the beginning of that episode about this kind of restructuring of the show and trying to figure out a new way to approach it in a way that fits my lifestyle and just kind of my needs for time, and also still being able to really get a lot out of these conversations. So sure enough, it has been going well. This season is all recorded and is all in the editing phase now, so you can expect consistent episodes before getting ready for the next season. I'm approaching it with a kind of 2 seasons per year kind of thing. Try to get a good crop of artists in here and do it every other week, so that there's never a shortage of great conversations with great artists. For this episode, I'm actually speaking with someone who I only relatively recently connected with. I had been familiar with his work from before. Is one of the three people that is part of Disparate Projects, which is a kind of cooperative publishing and curation group that's composed of Micah McCoy, who is today's guest, as well as Van Thomas Powell and Lisa Beard. So if you haven't seen Disparate Projects, definitely go check them out. They're doing some very cool stuff, and there is some very cool stuff in the works that we'll be seeing more about soon. So I'm talking with Micah McCoy today about his work, Minor Prophet, and kind of his experience about making that work. So to kind of get you guys a primer on who Micah is as an artist, I'll quickly read off a bio about him. Micah McCoy is a photographer, curator, and poet based in Northwest Arkansas and currently teaches at the University of Arkansas. He received his MFA in photography from Columbia College Chicago in 2022 and has exhibited work in solo and group exhibitions both in the United States and abroad. His work explores issues of religiosity, anxiety, and social detachment. Micah's editorial photography has been featured in publications including NBC News, The New York Post, among others. He is a co-founder of Disparate Projects, a platform for photographic curation, theory, and publishing, including Disparate Press, which focuses on producing books and zines that showcase innovative photography and collaborative work. So that's a bit about Micah and what he does. A fellow Central Illinoisan, which I only relatively recently learned about from getting into his work before this conversation. So without much else to say, here is my conversation with Micah McCoy. Hi, Micah. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on and chat about photography a little this morning.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've had the show running. Obviously, folks that have been following me in the show know that it has been quite many moons since the last actual interview episode, which I think was with Lindsay Godin, if I have that correct. Awesome. She's been doing some great work for folks that are following her. I think she often goes to SPE stuff. You know SPE?
Yeah, I've been to a few things that not going to be able to make it this year, but yeah.
Every single time I catch up with my first professor, Jason, he always asks me, "Are you going to SPE this year?" And I'm like, "I really, really want to," but I just can never swing the plane ticket and then the lodging and all that, and also the timing. By the time I'll be able to afford it, chances are that booking is way too expensive. Anyway, but it's in Atlanta this year, I think.
Yeah, it is. I just was asked by someone last night if I was going, and I was talking about how I've got a few projects now I'm working on that I'm gonna like want to travel for, and so
Hmm.
I was like, I think I need to prioritize like the work of like versus networking, and that stuff's fun, but like there's only so many resources, and so I wanted to save it for getting on the road to make some work. So
Yeah, it was like different in grad school because like I could apply for like a travel grant or something
exactly,
like
yep.
that, and have FAFSA refunds and all that to help out. But now it's like, oh, I'm like out of school working
Exactly.
two
It's
jobs.
a whole
It's like
different world
crap.
once you're out of school and figuring out how to do this as I kind of when I got out of grad school, I was like I called myself I'm like a civilian now, It's like you have to
Yeah.
learn how to exist outside of that framework.
Yep. I've always joked about once you graduate college, you become a real person, and if you go back
Exactly.
to school, you're back to not being a real person. And then once you
Exactly.
graduate, the next step of college, yeah. So if you go in a master's and get a PhD or even a second master's or something, like you go back to this like non-real world where you're in a walkable city for 2 to 4 years, and it's like you're in this like almost utopian environment of sort. It's like, hang on a minute,
Absolutely.
can we make that like all of the United States?
Exactly. Yeah, I did my grad school in Chicago at Columbia College, so like
Oh yeah.
the that was the first time I'd lived somewhere like that, and yeah, it's a whole different world, and there's things I loved about it, things I didn't like as so much, but like there's
Hmm.
so many advantages of the infrastructure, everything going on. Like it was like stepping into a different world that felt like it was just like created and existed for me to, you know, think about art and be floating around in this kind of different state.
And being in the best city on the planet at the same time.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I would ride the red line, back to my apartment and just like stop off and go to a Cubs game after crit,
Yep.
and it's like what a world.
And that would have been trailing off of a couple years after the the World Series win
So
in
this was
2016.
while I was in school was when they kind of cleaned house and traded off the core from that team, so they were really
Yeah.
bad. But that
Which is
like
back to normal essentially.
yeah, I grew up with that being my world, and so I enjoyed it though because tickets were like cheap. So I would look on
Yep.
the ticket websites on my way home sometimes and be like, "It's a nice day, and I can get a ticket for like $3. We're gonna go to
Oh yeah,
We're
yeah.
gonna go to Wrigley today and take in
Especially
a
if it's not
game."
like a big game where they're playing like they're not playing the White Sox, they're not
Yeah.
playing the Cardinals or something where those games will be like likely to be more
Yep.
expensive. Like,
And after being in this very intense grad school environment where there's friendly competition to some degree between all the
yep,
you're doing crit and it's intense, people are really digging into the work and you're exhausted, and it was nice to have that felt like such a departure from that whole world, going out with people that nobody there was worried about art or photos in a way that was like kind of nice to just like step out for a little bit. So that was a good reset.
tell me then about kind of how you got started in art and photography in general.
I think I always loved photos. I don't think I, thought of it as art so much as a kid, but when I look back, there's certain things that it makes sense that I would have the approach I do now. Like I had a little Fisher Price like 110 camera that I had when I was really young, and I would have like a roll of film every 6 months or something. And I remember a friend coming over and he was like a little, impulsive, and he like blew through a roll of film on my camera in like one night, like not
Yep.
thinking through the photos, not, and even at that point, there was something in me that was like, like you're like, wasting something sacred in my mind or something, to where it like
Hmm.
really bothered me. And it wasn't just that, like, it's the film that I'm not going to have other film, but like also something about the kind of flippancy with which he was kind of like going through this film that,
Yeah.
like, I'm pretty deliberate with how I work, and it makes sense, like, looking back, that I think I was kind of already approaching it in a similar way to what I do now. And then, like, my mom has always been really into photos, and she was like an avid scrapbooker, documented, everything we did, and spent, all of her free time like sitting around laying out these photo albums. And so I think, it makes sense as well that I would be interested in like books and bookmaking and that kind of thing, because it was always around. And then, even though we like were in this church that was like a kind of very legalistic Christian church that was pretty restrictive. And so there was a lot of things that, like, I didn't like listen to like mainstream music a lot and stuff, but my parents did love like old movies. So we would watch a lot of like Hitchcock and like noir kind of stuff. And so that was always around, and I think definitely influenced kind of how I see and kept me interested in kind of visual mediums. I think that makes sense, kind of how I got where I ended up.
And so you then went on to school for undergrad was not in photography, but it was in sociology, correct?
Yeah, it was a sociology major at University of Illinois, and did that, like, normal 18 to 22, whatever. And after I got out, I didn't want to do, like, I enjoyed it, okay, but it was more of like, how do I apply kind of the ideas that I was developing in school to something more artistic? And I'd done music, but I don't think I was talented enough to feel like I could make a go at that. It was like something I loved, but that wasn't going to be like the expression. It was like how I was going to, express art the rest of my life. And so I picked up a camera and just decided, like, I'm going to teach myself this. I'm going to work at it. And for 10 years or so, I did like commercial stuff and did some weddings, all the kind of usual stuff. Well, but this whole time I'm, on the side making weird photos for myself that I'm not showing anybody. And
Yeah.
there was always this tension, where it's like I'm trying to enjoy the stuff I'm doing weddings and portraits and everything, and always feeling a little bit like this isn't quite right, and I need to be doing something else. So there was a point, like, probably 10 years in, where my wife was like, you can't keep, like, you're miserable, you can't keep doing this, you need to shift it, do something else. And so I started researching grad schools and decided I wanted to do photography as more of a artistic practice going forward. And ended up at Columbia. And that's kind of where we kind of start with this.
Yeah, and Columbia College Chicago, for folks that for some reason aren't aware, is, I don't know if I would equate it to like the RISD of the Midwest, but it kind of sort of is to some extent. Like
I
it
think
has a
so.
really, it's got a really good reputation in the photography community. They've had some really like incredible teachers there, like Dawood Bey,
Yep.
is like, and like just amazing artists come through there. And the proximity to the Art Institute of Chicago, both the School of and obviously the museum, for those of you Ferris Bueller fans.
Yes, yes.
God, I mean, what an iconic movie. Can't get enough of it.
Absolutely. I just watched that with my kids recently, and anytime I watch a movie that takes place in Chicago, I'm like looking for like where, if it makes sense geographically for how the plot, and that one I think does
Hmm.
fairly well.
No.
Time at Columbia was great. Like Daoud was fantastic, and as like a, photographer who does a lot of portraits, like getting to
Hmm.
talk to him and get his insight on things was just like invaluable. And like Kelly and Paul are great with their bookmaking stuff. They were there whenever I was there, and then Jay Wolke was like my go-to person while I was there. Like
Yeah.
this project would not be the same, without him.
Yeah, so the overall experience at Columbia obviously, led to Minor Profit, which is the project
Yep.
we're primarily talking about today. And to my knowledge, this project is still technically ongoing, despite having been going on for a few years.
It's ongoing in the way that I'm still kind of in the finalizing, sequencing, and figuring out what I want to do with like a final book for it. I so this was all made in Central Illinois on this like family farm that was in my wife's family, but is also like right down the road from where I'm from. Like it was all intertwined, the experience of being in that space and in the land. And we moved from there to we're in Northwest Arkansas, like near Fayetteville now. So I'm not making any more work for this because it was so tied to
Hmm.
geographically where we were at. But and also the after I kind of finished the work and moved here right after I got out of grad school, I really didn't want to touch it for a while. There's a lot of work here that I didn't even realize was as like raw to me as it was. And so like looking back on that time, there was a lot of good things that came out of it, but also like I think I was not in the best, emotional place while I was making this, which I think
Hmm.
sometimes like that's the makes the best art in some cases. But
That's what some people say, at least.
I mean, it definitely you can go either way, but for me, I think that sometimes can be true, and I think I can still tap into places when I am in a good place and tap into that same well. But for me, the source of it a lot of times does go back to things that are a little tougher, and so
Hmm.
I think I did kind of when I graduated and kind of moved here and started essentially like a whole new life in a way. I
Yeah.
didn't want to touch it. And so now I'm kind of finally getting back to go, like, I love this work and want to give it its due.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm at with that now. So we're in the kind of, I'm kind of getting back into sequencing and pulling the threads and kind of seeing where it goes in that way.
Now, obviously, before I had been introduced to your work through seeing the stuff you've been doing with Disparate Projects, which there's another very good podcast episode with
Yes, yes.
Michael Joven Dalton.
Yeah, yeah, that was a great
If y'all
experience.
want to learn about that, all three folks from Disparate Projects are in that. But before kind of getting familiar with your work in general, I was unaware that you were also from Central Illinois, made a lot of work in Central Illinois, and had since moved away. There's a lot of photographers from outside of Chicago that I'm starting to see pop up more and more in recent years, which is, I think, possibly because of like we're all kind of sort of finding each other
Yeah,
intentionally or not.
yeah,
But
yeah.
also, I think that the work being made in the rural Midwest, or about the rural Midwest, is like kind of starting to become a really prominent theme that I'm really excited to see a lot of folks kind of paying attention to.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was exciting for me, like when I was not in the art world while I was, making work on my own, and I was looking at a lot of like older work. I loved when I first got started. Like one of my first photographers I discovered that was a little more off the beaten path was Ralph Meatyard, who was like originally from Normal, Illinois, moved to Kentucky, but like made a lot of work that I think you could definitely, a lot of the like square black and white kind of compositions that I use in a lot of this work definitely pays some homage to him. But
Hmm.
um, I wasn't looking at new work and wasn't aware of any kind of, scene happening, or like really until I went to grad school. And so it was a gradual process of starting to find other photographers. Like I was, I think, listening to some podcast and came across like Tim Carpenter,
Hmm.
who, I discovered was literally in the same county, that I
Yeah.
was, where he was from, in Monticello. And like my favorite pizza was Filippo's Pizza in Monticello. So
Yeah.
like starting to discover these other people that were kind of mining the same, like using the same canvas, but like how many different approaches you can kind of take. And I think my work's doing something else, but yet if you see the pieces that are there, there's a lot of the same pieces in a lot of this various work, the same kind of basic building blocks. But I think there's a lot of photographers taking those building blocks and doing something really different with it, which is exciting. And it's
Hmm.
fun to see I've always, in art, really enjoyed looking at different movements that happen, and where you kind of see this people working in the same territory that maybe either know each other or don't, and are affected by the same kind of things happening in the world, and how these little things spring up, and you see
Yeah.
things just naturally shoot up out of the ground. It's really interesting.
So, I mean, we've talked a bit about place a lot in aspect to your work. So, since you've moved now to Arkansas, at the time of making this, you kind of already touched on it a little bit. You were in Central Illinois, or at least in Illinois. How did where you live or where you were from influence how you developed this work and how you kind of structured each image to kind of finding phrases, all that?
Yeah, I think that it was so influenced by the kind of solitude of the place. And I think that there's like the whole thing was intended to be somewhat like, I have my family in it, but we were playing parts to some extent. But like
Hmm.
biography always slips in, I think, in any work. But I was in Chicago for the week, essentially doing grad school, and then I would take the train back down every weekend to be with my family and make work. And so I was very attuned to, in a way that I'd never been before, of how just remote where we were. We were at this farmhouse with no houses within a mile of us, and
Yeah.
uh, and then there's one house, and then it's another 3 miles to the next house, or whatever. It's literally nowhere. And so there was a sense of this, that we were almost trapped in this place, that you kind of start to go a little crazy in a way. And I think that comes
Yeah.
across, and that the place influenced that. It there
Hmm.
you have a whole different mindset in your life. Whenever you have to think about, when you need food, it's 40 minutes to get to a grocery store, and
Yeah, exactly.
your whole existence and kind of way of interacting with the world is just very different than when you're in the city. And
Hmm.
because I was doing both of these lives, simultaneously, I was tuned into that in a way I'd never had been before. And so I think the
Hmm.
work really is influenced by that kind of duality.
Yeah, yeah. Like looking through some of the photos in the pool excerpt that you sent, like thinking about the idea of like going stir crazy, really does kind of come through in certain images. Like I'm looking at, is that you lying down in the grass below the tree?
Yeah, yeah.
Or is okay? Because I know there's some self portraits in there.
Yep.
And then looks like I think it's your wife kind of like lying down on the table. And like all these like very like they feel like isolated spots, even though throughout the whole project we have the same four people
Yeah.
coming up consistently, and the two dogs.
I think that one thing that when I look through the whole work, there is occasionally images where, two people are together, but most of the portraits, or, kind of stage documentary stuff with people in it. Like there's a lot
Hmm.
of even within this, we're out here miles from anyone, and even in this space, we're like it feels like each one of us is isolated in a way
Yep.
that I think gets it a little bit of that stir crazy kind of feeling.
And what's also interesting too with the idea of that we have these photos of individual people that feel very isolated, very not quite. I don't think lonely is the right word for it.
Yeah.
But it does still kind of prod at the idea that there is still another person present, and that being you,
Yes.
the
Yes.
photographer. Um, and I think that starts to introduce an interesting conversation with how this work kind of goes between being like a first person and a third person thing, kind of bounces back and forth with that. Because it's so clearly about this idea of family and a little bit of tension with this isolation that we keep talking
Yes.
about.
Yes.
Um, and also that this project is loosely based, using your words, on the Book of Job from the Judeo-Christian
Yeah. Yeah.
traditions and teachings. With that, for those folks who are not very familiar with the Book of Job, would you be able to explain what that is briefly, and then how it relates to the work?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I grew up in a very intense church that I think influenced a lot of kind of uh, my personality in a lot of ways, and I think when I was a child, I was introduced to these different Bible stories, and Job was one where essentially this guy has like a great life, he's got a family, like he's got animals, got everything he needs, and God kind of like tests him with like, your wife's gonna die, you're gonna lose all your kids, you're gonna start over. And then there's kind of like a point where he's like, God's still great, whatever, and God gives him like another family. And I was like really bothered by that as a kid. I'm like,
Yeah.
as my family, I'm like, I want my family. I don't want like it seemed I'm not viewing it as like some kind of allegory. I'm like taking it personal as a kid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um and so I had all this baggage that I brought with me into adulthood of like, I'm raising my kids in a different way than I was raised, and I have this kind of ever present guilt that I'm not, keeping the torch going, despite the fact that I don't want to keep the torch going. And so I kind of, since that story had stuck with me so much, that was kind of always in the back of my mind when thinking about family and thinking about this, the blessings, using kind of the terminology from my childhood that I was given by having this family and children that I love, wife that I love, and even our animals, and the kind of cruelty of life that there's no guarantee that you won't lose them, and that I think that ties into the land in this as well, that the land is kind of like really the deity in this, in a way that it's the thing that's going
Hmm.
to last. And there's like structures that are, there's one photo in the series that's this like odd kind of cube structure that's out in the middle of
Hmm.
nowhere, and like that's going to last past all of us, and
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
was this kind of reckoning with that, I think, happening with me at that stage as I'm working through like, what do I believe with all this. And I think it having kids and seeing kind of the cycle of life happening, like you start to think about these things more, and are forced to think about them in ways that were less important when you're younger. And so a lot of that influence, I think, is coming into this work.
It's interesting seeing how like the landscape around the farmhouse, it really does become its own character of sort. And that you guys are just kind of living in it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it kind of reminds me of, I've talked with a couple friends of mine about this, about some project I'm working on, that um one of the things that has always lived with me from being raised Catholic is this idea of humanity is in the world but not of the world.
Yeah.
And people, I feel like that feels like a very like Catholic Orthodox, like
Sure.
very
Sure.
like non-Protestant way to look at things. Um because it kind of puts a kind of duty of sort on us as we're here. And thinking of looking at this work with that in my mind, it is kind of reinforcing that idea that this place that you're residing in, that you're photographing in, is kind of the one in charge of sort. And I think,
Absolutely.
like, I'm especially like from like the straight landscape photographs that are in here. Look, obviously the one of the concrete mystery cube building, to some of the more like the tree photos in the winter and all that. What I think is like a big old root kind of like arcing upward in the middle of the frame, like things like that. It really, like, yeah, that's all alive from like a literal botanical standpoint, but it really adds a certain kind of energy throughout the work that's kind of like pulling on you guys, your family, as you're being photographed here.
It's driven that point home even more, of like that house was like a family house, but it's been sold. Someone else has moved in. The house, the land, it doesn't care about us, you know. Like
Mm-hmm.
we were there, and it was the whole thing was very important to us. But it keeps going on, and we're like, you know, we're gone down the road,
Yeah,
you
you guys are
know.
what, like 8 hours away
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
house now, something like that.
yeah, yeah.
I forget. Arkansas is one of those states that I forget exists a lot. Like that, there and Delaware are like two of the most forgettable states for me.
When we moved here, it was like we tell people, and they're like, "What? Well,
I
why?"
forgot that state was there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
I thought that was just Texas.
a lot of people here, I think, kind of feel that way.
Yep.
Where we're at in Northwest Arkansas, yeah, there's a lot of like Texas people that are around, so it
Hmm.
feels like a little bit of a Texas suburb.
Discount Texas, something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the project as it is, as a whole, and all that. How did this project start the way that you expected it to? Like, did you start this project like, I want to make a project about this thing because I've been feeling these emotions around this matter, or did it kind of organically come out as you were shooting?
I think a little bit of both. I think to start, there were certain things I really wanted to do with it, and it stayed. That's through line stayed pretty consistent. Like I had these memories of being in church as a little kid and being like below like my parents, and like everybody in the church has like their hands raised, and I'm just like a little person sitting there looking up, you know, and it was like a kind of strange, weird experience. And so like I had this compulsion to make photographs that somehow captured some of that. So like there's a photo of my wife with her hands raised, and it was kind of like a
Yep.
rewriting of the history of our family, where like instead of going the way we went, we were this kind of faithful family doing the things that I thought I was supposed to do when I was young, and kind of
Hmm.
rewriting that history through these photographs. And so I wanted to start with that, but I didn't know exactly where it would go. And I think it became more and more influenced by the land as it went on. And that was the thing that really like took me by surprise, I think, a little bit. But then in looking at it more, like we were probably a mile and a half from a little country church that my wife's family went to, and like we even took our kids there sometimes when they were younger, and it was like one of the few places like dealing with religion now that I was was a little bit of a healing experience in a way going there, because there was like a lot of like great people that were much, less judgmental than the people I'd kind of the system I'd grown up in. Their focus was much more on charity and making this world better for people, and
Mm-hmm.
but there was this little church there, and it was a Methodist church, and my grandfather was actually a Methodist minister, and it like been on the circuit of churches, being a minister in all these small country churches around. And so there was a creek out back of our house that went over by this church. And like there's a short film that I made that goes with this work that has some footage my grandfather shot in
Yeah.
the probably 60s, when my father was like really young, and there's footage of people being baptized like in this creek that looks the landscape, it's the same landscape that all this was work was being made in. So that was kind of
Mm-hmm.
the connecting point where there's this ambiguity that gets introduced, because I do find value in a lot of these things that were happening and kind of tied into the land that was kind of like a reverse of what I'd grown up in, that I did want to leave and not want to be a part of.
The emphasis on your own family, like in this with the I think it's the medley is
Yeah.
the thing on your website, yeah.
Yeah.
That goes between those, what was it, 8 millimeter, 16 millimeter,
Yeah. Yeah.
something.
Yep. It's
Yep.
like, yep.
And then with your footage put in there, it gets me to think a little bit about the long-standing tradition in photography of photographing one's own family.
Yep.
And of course, most people listening probably instantly go to Sally Mann because Sally Mann
Sure.
is the
Sure.
goat of that.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm curious how, like, especially now that you've stopped the shooting for the work and you're kind of working through it now, and also shooting new work, how has the practice of photographing your family informed the way that you make work at large?
I think that it was invaluable in figuring out how to photograph people in a way that gets whatever, their essence, as much as you can capture in a photograph, across, but still, making your own statement and figuring out how to navigate that space to make something that feels right and doesn't feel exploitative, or like I don't think that I would have said at some point during this that it was a collaboration, and I think that's maybe there were times where it felt collaborative, but a lot of the times I was directing and pretty much saying like, do this, and you're acting. I'm the director. I wrote the script.
Hmm.
You're
Yeah.
acting, and you know, but figuring out how to not to be like, taking it back to Hitchcock, he always called his actors like cattle, and it was like,
Oh gosh,
and
yeah.
trying not to be that, but also get your point across, and that is a uh, difficult thing to navigate, I think, at times. And now that I'm started some work that I'm working more with people outside of my family, I think that there's a lot of lessons I took from that. And a lot of it
Hmm.
is subtle, just how you operate in small ways and interactions with people to get what you want out, but in a way that's not pushing them too far into something that they don't want.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that I at least always find a difficulty when making work that is very personal like this is the very fact that it is such a personal thing that you're photographing and trying to communicate this feeling in the project. And I think looking through the work and reading the statement that you have, as well as what Tim Carpenter wrote for it a couple years ago, it really helps kind of put all this work into this category of like, yes, it's photographs of Micah's family, but it's also very much about this feeling and this tension and all that related to the landscape and the home and the people that live there. Um, did you ever struggle while working on this, while shooting it or while editing it, with that common issue when doing personal work?
I don't think I did so much then, but there was, like I said before, I wasn't always in the best place during the point of making this work. So there's like, things happening in your life that bleed in and influenced what I was doing. But when I was making the work, it was more uh, workmanlike in a way where it's like I have an idea, we're just doing it, we're executing it. And
Hmm.
what we're doing in the photo, what I chose to photograph, is influenced by these things that are happening or things that I'm thinking about or struggling with. But like when I'm actually making the work, it was just about the work. And
Yep.
but then I think it was when I finished it that I look back and realize, what I was thinking and going through personally, or, reckoning with these past things that from growing up, that it was a little harder for a while to then figure out what to do with it, because
Yeah.
making it, I'm, very much in the zone, focused on getting the thing that I want, and it felt like I, in that moment, have there's a power in being the one behind the camera creating this thing. And I think in a way, when I was making it, it felt like this is the one thing I can control, and
Yeah.
that will last. And and I'm thinking about all these things that will pass that I don't want to lose, and I can save it in a photograph and I can be in control. But then, like, looking back, it was there was a time period where it was more in the editing process that I'm like, I
Hmm.
don't really want to deal with this right now. It was
Yeah.
good to make, but harder to look at.
And I think it also kind of nods back to what we talked about before about like the landscape will outlive you guys, and technically, the buildings and such too, the structures may not last as long. And that the photograph also will outlive you, me, everybody, because if the photographs are permanent and for the lifespan of the photograph's existence, right? Like until that
Yeah.
negative is burned, until the last file is deleted, until the last print is shredded. Um, it kind of falls into that same. That's, I think, one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated by place based work that turns places into a kind of character.
Yeah.
So one thing that I'm always curious about, and I feel like not enough people ask artists,
Yeah.
is the boring stuff. Like, we all talk about the act of shooting and the editing and all that, and it kind of makes it seem like an artist who has put together his body of work is just always on it. They're always on it. It's just like their whole life is dedicated. I'm curious, what was it like, and what were you doing between photo shoots, between studio editing sessions, and all that? What was kind of that timeline like? How frequently were you shooting and such?
I definitely, not a lot, really. Like, that time period, yeah, I was in Chicago during the week. And like when I first came to Columbia, I think it was Kelly Connell said to me, like, oh, like, the way we structure the week, like, you generally will have like Thursday through Sunday that you're free, and like you may want to go back home to make work or whatever during that time. And
Hmm.
when I first got there, I'm like, why would I want to do that? Like, I'm in Chicago, like there's
Yeah.
all these new things to photograph. And then sure enough, before you know it, I'm taking the train back and making photos every weekend. And so my process for that, because there was a lot of things that are just not the work that I had to deal with. I had to figure out
Hmm.
how to make enough money to stay there. So
Yep.
had a fellowship at the Museum of Contemporary Photography while I was there, and was doing that like 20 hours a week,
Yep.
doing like marketing and social media and stuff for them. And then I TA'd throughout. I taught a photo one class my last semester there while I was like, preparing my thesis show. And so there was a lot of things happening. And then I was a dad through all this too. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
my wife was amazing and took, a heavy burden of the load of, the day to day child care a lot of that time. And I would try to do as much as I could when I was back to be involved and help out. But there was a whole lot going on that, yeah, was not the photos. So there was always
Yeah.
this trying to find little times to think about it, and there was always that pressure when you're in grad school that you have to make a lot of work. So I had to
Yeah.
figure out, how do I condense these little bits of time that I can make work and be really prepared to hit the ground running. So I'd like an iPad, and I would draw these, I'm a photographer because I can't draw. So I would draw these like stick figure kind of little I'd make a square, and just sketch out what do I want to see in a photo. And that's how a lot of the early photos in the series started. And like, I can trace back, like a lot of them are like exact, copies at first. And then as it went on, I got looser with it. But
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was a way to be like making photos in my head while I'm not able to be there. And so there was a lot of that. And still today, like, it's always a struggle to find the time to do the things that I want to do, and
Yeah.
even things that I do want to do that are photo adjacent. I have Disparate that I do with Van Pal and Lisa Beard. We done curating and bookmaking and things like that, and it's fantastic, and it's like makes life worth living, working with my friends on things. But it's, takes more time, and so you have that, and always the struggle to figure out how to take all these things and make them work financially is something hardly anybody talks about. It's all just kind of
Yeah.
this magic thing that artists just, and I think there's a level of not wanting to look at the hard part to some extent. And so that's always a
Yeah.
struggle. I'm teaching at University of Arkansas now, and so that takes time, but at least with that, it's something that makes some money and keeps me in a creative mindset where I'm more likely to want to, finish up working, talking with students, and then go apply what I've been talking about to, my own projects, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it is always interesting to me from like a academic standpoint. I have another note too in a moment, but the academia side of things, seeing how certain schools kind of ebb and flow in like their not really notoriety, but I guess like their like household name in the photo world
Yeah.
kind of thing. And it's like certain schools will always be there. Like we already know, like Yale will always be
Yeah, of
there. We
course.
know that Cal Arts and School of the Arts Institute will always be there. But then like RISD kind of comes up a bit more, and then Nebraska Lincoln and things like that. University of Arkansas is coming up a lot more.
I think it's a good conversation to have, though, to think about how that, how we view these things, and how from personal experience you can go some of these places that you would think by looking at who's there, it's like, oh, I want to be there. It's great. And it is, but like how big of an impact people that don't have as much notoriety can have places like you were at ISU, that's not like somewhere that you would be in conversations as much. And like, you know, it's, I think there's value in a lot of places, and value in just getting like so many perspectives. And it's uh, kind of fantastic how big this world is
Oh
in
yeah.
some ways, and how many different voices there are.
To for the folks that are listening that are considering grad school, the ultimately the place where you study is going to be the place that like fits what your needs are. It's not necessarily going to be the school that has the hot shot photographers
Oh
that you keep
yeah.
seeing
and
published. Like,
and a lot of times too, the professors that are going to have the time to invest in you
yeah,
are not necessarily the ones that have had the like breakthrough success in the same way that we, maybe are shooting for, but you realize really quickly how little that matters to the actual work,
Hmm.
and how many photographers are fantastic and have made great work, and it just wasn't the right time for it to break through in whatever way,
Yep.
that. And
Like it makes me think of like Barbara Bosworth, who's like always been kind of known, but like she just in the past like 15 years is just like like everybody in the contemporary photography community knows Barbara Bosworth now.
yeah, yeah.
Even though she had been making work decades prior
uh,
and like
and
publishing it and all that.
Yeah, yeah. Then those are great lessons to take, of that you just keep, at Columbia, Dawood Bey would always say, like, keep making the great work and trying to show it to
Hmm.
people, and you'll eventually, like, it depends on what your definition is of making it, but you'll get somewhere, if you just keep
Yep.
making good work and showing it to people. That's like all there is to it in a way, and it's simpler than we make it out to be sometimes, I think. And
And the one thought that I had too when you were describing the less exciting aspects between photo shoots
yeah,
is I feel like it's important for us artists to talk about that side of things, because for the younger by age or by experience artists that are getting into things, they may look at it as, like you said, this kind of like magical thing that just kind of
yeah.
pops out, and it's just like turns out they've been making it for 15 years or 10 years or whatever.
There's a great passage in that new Sally Mann book where she talks about that very thing, that how much of your time is just spent doing things that you go like, and for her, it's like she's made it, and you're still just spend most of your time doing things that you don't want to do, that are just like moving the ball forward in your life,
One thing that kind of makes me think of is I was looking at one of my favorite books I have on my shelf is Christine Potter's Dark Waters.
Yep.
And like of the past like 10 years, that is like in my top three favorite books. It's just unbelievably good. And I was looking at the plate list at the back and looking at the time frame that she was shooting. It was essentially like 12 years worth of work.
Yeah.
But when in conversations, like, she's not talking too much about like that time frame. But it is interesting to see like, oh, what else was she working on when Dark Waters was in its infancy? Did she
Yeah.
know that the book was going to be Dark Waters, or were these just like just a subject that she was photographing now and then, bodies of water with violent names and such?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then that later led to like I'm always interested in that. That kind of leads me to another question about like referencing other artists' work. So while you were working on Minor Prophet, both shooting and now in the editing phase, are there any books or other art beyond photography that you've been kind of touching on and like pulling from in the process?
While I was making that work, I really was trying. What part of it was just I'm trying to survive in grad school with living in two places with a family, so I didn't have a lot of time to be digging into a lot of things
Hmm.
outside, and was so overstimulated just with all the work I'm seeing from my cohort and things that I'm introduced. So a lot of what I had time to take in there were visiting artists, things that were kind of served up on a platter for me. So, during that time, like I got to, Columbia was great with bringing in people and getting us a chance to talk to different photographers. So, like, I got to talk to Christine Potter, got to talk to Odette England, and there's a
Hmm.
lot of like similarities with, I think, our approach to shooting with some of those photographers that I took things from, of like contemporary work, but then I really was not looking at a lot of things outside, and intentionally to some extent trying not
Hmm.
to be influenced by what was out there, because I think uh, I could have made this project in a way that was better suited for the photo world. Photo, like
Yeah.
shooting black and white squares was like a very old-fashioned kind of approach,
Yeah.
and
It's either 6x7 or 4x5 these days. You don't get any other choices.
yeah, and I think if I would have been looking at things, I might have been influenced to be like, I should try to make stuff that's going to fit in with the current milieu a little better, and I didn't want that, so I, stuck to what I was doing. But I think the influences that were the strongest on this work was stuff kind of outside the mood I was getting from music I was listening to, and a lot of like old blues I was listening to at the time.
Hmm.
And um, I think that this would not look the way it does had I not like been such a huge. I love Ingmar Bergman and love his films, and so like I think there's a lot of commonality there with biographically, like he was his father was like an important religious figure in Sweden and was very like kind of pushed that on him as a kid. And then so in the like movie arc you kind of see these themes coming out of figuring out how to kind of reckon with like what do I actually think about things. And so
Hmm.
there's those themes there, but then also just visually like the way that I was trying to capture things with the tones in my photos and the black and white, like I think, and even the way I photograph people and the way I wanted the portraits to look, I think were influenced a lot in that way. Like I had a professor that was like, I see a lot of Bergman here, and your wife could be one of the Swedish blondes. His movies that he's using as kind of a vehicle for getting these ideas across.
Yeah, so and like now that you've been sitting with the work more, I know like at least on your website there's this project and then there's more recent work near the bottom. Um, how do you see this project as fitting into your overall practice? Is this like your what you would consider like your first like cohesive, mature project versus the work you made prior? Or do you see this as like something other than that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a little bit like if we're using music analogies, you'll which I like to do because I feel like I actually know more about that than like photography in a way, of like the trivia. But like when I look at like my favorite bands, and a lot of times you'll see on people's biographies, they had three or four bands before the one that broke
Yeah.
through. And so I feel like I had been working on things that there's like little bits there that are worthwhile, but had never like found my voice, till that. So definitely, I would say that's like the debut album,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so now I definitely feel like I have more to say, but also like that was such a all encompassing because of the way it was so tied to my background and these like heavy themes, that going forward there's a little bit of a like what how do you apply what you learned here to things that are not that you don't know inside and out so well. And I think that's been kind of the
Hmm.
fun of what I've been working on going forward, which is still in its embryonic kind of stage, but also like figuring out how do you apply some of this in a way that makes sense but also is new. And I don't want to repeat, like I
Yeah.
could I I think that there's a visual style here that I really like that I think suits this work really well. But I see a
Hmm.
lot of photographers that hit on something and then stay with that. And I kind of admire people who find the thing and then go, okay, I did it. I'm going to figure out what's next versus just replicating it and taking this like kind of framework or skin and applying it to something else. So I think what I've been
Hmm.
making now does look very different and feel very different, I think.
considering we're starting to talk a little bit about more recent work, are you willing to talk about some of the ideas that you're starting to shoot now?
Yeah, I think it's still fresh, but I'm really interested in going a little more like this. What I did before was very personal, and the next thing that I'm starting on now is much more of a kind of cold analytical look at something. I don't want to go too deep into it because it's
Hmm.
so fresh, and I'm like, but I'm working contacts and trying to like figure out how I crack the code of kind of breaking into this world that I want to get into. But I'm really interested in the way the way artists make things, and a lot of art that I love, how it can work on multiple levels, and there can be a lot beneath the surface in the way kind of in the American art world and music world, how people take other things and make them new, and take pieces and resynthesize them into something new and exciting. And I think that is kind of the core of what I'm looking for here. It's
Hmm.
very different, than what I had done, but I'm excited by it for sure.
Yeah, because at least looking through like the gallery on the bottom of your website, and then of course, the other work you're sharing on Instagram, there's some obviously like the visual difference is very distinct because obviously it's shifting to color for the other work that's not
Yeah.
in Minor Prophet. Um, I know that other photographers have talked about their attitude towards sharing new work. Whether they like to just kind of share it as it comes, just kind of like, put it out in the world, versus like holding their cards close to their chest and like really protecting things. Where do you kind of fall in the sharing new work side of things?
I have to fight the urge to share like immediately. I um I get excited about things, and it's like probably I have trouble focusing a lot, like a lot of people in our age, and I think there is that search for that, dopamine hit of like I'm putting this thing out here and I want people to see it, and so I have to fight that urge. But
Hmm.
I think I'm leaning more towards trying to keep things closer to the vest going forward, because it feels like kind of like what I was talking about with the photos, that they're like as a child, like really valuing each frame, and I want
Hmm.
to give reverence to that idea that it is something valuable and it should be kind of protected in a way.
That is, I feel like that's a more reasonable way to go about it as a contemporary artist. I think it's also a little bit pushing back against a lot of the norms that we've seen in social media, where it's like Instagram and Twitter and whatever, like they all like kind of force you to like constantly be sharing so you can stay in like at least your followers eyes, and if you aren't doing that, then you're not gonna it's like they're kind of like forcing this anxiety onto us, and I feel like it's effective because it starts to kind of develop a little bit of excitement for the people that do follow you, that once you do start sharing things,
Yeah,
like oh wow, there's something coming.
yeah, I definitely bristle a little bit of the idea of ever revealing too much, and I that's part of like the work that I was making. You're in grad school and you are workshopping it with all these your cohort. It's your they know a lot of these crits become like therapy sessions in a way, and you're constantly having to put the work out there and write artist statements, and a lot of artists I love do maintain a certain level of mystery that I kind of envy in a way, that
Yeah.
going forward with some projects, I think I would like to leave it a little bit more to the viewer to figure out, what's happening versus me telling you about it. Because so much of the work
Hmm.
I love, it's like it's doing things that the artist, if what the artist might tell me it's doing, I'm finding something else in it. And I think sometimes
Hmm.
whenever you explain too much, it just becomes, it takes the magic out of it. And
Yeah.
luckily though, I mean, I think this kind of art world and the photo world that we are navigating, there's a lot of photographers looking at each other's things and listening to podcasts, going to talks, that kind of thing. And ultimately, though, I think, you know, when I've had like solo shows of this work, most of the people that are looking at it, like, they're never going to listen to me on a podcast or even read the artist statement that's up on the wall. You know, they're going to look at the
Yeah.
art and take it at kind of face value at like whatever they approach it. And so I think when I'm making the work, a lot of times I try to think more about that person versus, you know, the person that knows all the cultural references or, you know,
Yeah.
can look at it and go, well, that looks like a Bergman film or whatever. Like,
Yep.
I think it's important to think about art as being something that is really powerful outside of the kind of academic uh, framework that I think we, as people that love it and want to talk about it and want to, you know, make it our lives, that's how we view it. But for a lot of people, it's something that they is just a small part of their life, but
Hmm.
is brings value still and is a important thing.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of my photo friends have heard me beat this dead horse. Is that I am so disinterested in photography for photographers,
Yeah.
and I'm so much more interested in photography that is really doing exactly what we were just saying. Like, we're communicating a feeling, an idea, a concept, a story to people who would just simply be interested in that subject matter.
Yeah.
um and like, you look at work in like the, say, the 70s and before, a lot of like the modern and postmodern, early postmodern work, a lot of that kind of falls into the, for me, I see it as like, oh, this is just photography for photographers. And
Yeah.
it was really important work, but like, and I see the value of it because it obviously was like, you know, you look at Man Ray and all them, like, obviously it's freaking Man Ray. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
going to say
Sure.
it's bad, but also, like, as someone with 2 degrees in photography and a partner who's a writer, like, both of us have this kind of like, yeah, it's kind of interesting, but like, what's going on here, really? And like,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
someone who's an inducted member of the contemporary photography world, I'm still like, I mean, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
I'm always, yeah, trying to push away ideas that I think I've gathered just from the kind of group think within it and try to think outside of that. And like the test for me when I'm talking about work is like, if there's a lot of times when you talk to somebody that's really a part of a community, they'll reference things that no one outside of that community would think
yep,
makes sense. You know, you talk to somebody that works in, you know, certain industries, they'll throw out terms that you're like, nobody in the real
yep,
world says this. They don't know what you're talking about. And so
yep,
I try to steer clear of that kind of language and that kind of thinking about things because I I think it, you know, different if you're in certain settings, it can be a useful way of, you know, providing that framework and theory for understanding things. But I ultimately, like, if you lose sight of the thing that makes art magic, I think you can definitely, you know, start to make work that it really doesn't resonate with people, which is ultimately what I want it to do. And so like for
yeah.
this work, I showed it this last year in um at the McLean County Arts Center, like
Shout out
downtown
McLean County Ed
Burlington.
Center.
And that was one of the best experiences showing it because like I had a lot of people coming in that were just local people that got things out of the work that some of them understood it instinctually in a way that nobody had, you know, in Chicago
Hmm.
or other places because they had lived in this place and they saw things in it that were, you know, a little deeper than what I was getting of reads, you know, from people that were viewing it more from like as academics, you know, and that was
Yeah.
really awesome to get to experience. And but then also, like, Jason Robondo stopped by at my opening, and uh getting to talk with him about it, and the the more art school kind of way is great too. And so
Yep.
there's a place for all of it, I think. But like, and I think work should exist on multiple levels. That's the best stuff.
Yeah, I know he also had a show. I think of his This Is Captured Paper project. I think he showed that at McLean County Art Center recently as well, which is really cool to see a place that I've always perceived as like, oh, this is like this local art hub kind of
Yeah,
thing. Not so much pulling in these like contemporary art world people that conveniently live very close or are at
yeah,
least from very close by areas. I had work in their amateur art show when I was in undergrad,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I got second place in the category of photography. I'm like, yeah, second place. I knew the person who got first place. I went to high school with her, but it's such a cool little space, and I love seeing local art institutions, galleries, museums, whatever, starting to. I think it goes into like if they have people who are in tune with the contemporary art world that work for those institutions, you start to pull in those types of artists versus someone who's like only ever known the local scene.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, my friend Marina works over at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and they've brought in artwork that I think the previous person who held their job would have otherwise probably not brought in because they just simply wouldn't have been familiar with it.
Yeah, sure.
So Marina brought in myself for one piece, and then brought in Alana Perino, who just received last year the Aperture. I forget the exact award. It's like one of their photo book awards,
Yeah, yeah.
and Alana's work is unbelievably good. So just seeing like, oh, we get like me, this kind of like fresh MFA grad, and then someone who just got the Aperture Photo Book Award in this local museum, like that's the kind of stuff I love seeing more of. Anyway, to kind of like start to tie things off now, is there anything that you want to tell folks about that is kind of upcoming, both with Disparate but also with your own work, and also where they can find your work?
So yeah, you can find my website, micahmccoy.com. I was ahead of the curve on buying up you know .coms back in high school, so I got the original, despite the fact that I think there is like a Micah McCoy who's like a wedding photographer in Texas or something. I don't know, but like I nabbed that URL, so that's easy to find. And then I'm Micah McCoy on Instagram and post there sometimes. And so you can find me at those places. But yeah, I'm kind of in this in between state where I put a lot of my time into Disparate, and so there's I'm making new work, and but it's still early there, but hoping to get a book of the minor prophet, like I've done some smaller things. Like I had a smaller book of work that kind of mixed poetry with the photos in my thesis show. But I would like to do something a little more final now that I've finished shooting everything for it. And that should be coming hopefully within the next few years. But Disparate, yeah, is you can find that at disparateprojects.com, and on Instagram as well. But there's a lot of exciting things that will be coming coming from us there. That's the main things right now.
Yeah, there's been some very cool things from y'all at doing all that, the collaborative effort of Disparate Projects and Press and all that. The curated fridge show
Yes,
that
yes.
I think is their first like storefront kind of. No, a storefront is not the right word, but it's like a. It's
Yeah,
not in their apartment. It's actually like
yeah,
in a
it
place
was
where you can go in
incredible.
public.
It was like a couple of mini fridges stacked, which was cool, like in a storefront. It was cool to see. I love what they have done over there, and just the DIY spirit of, and it's like with Disparate, that we just decided we enjoy making things together, and there's no reason that you shouldn't do it, you know. And
Yep.
I think the whole point of this for me, the side of being in the art world, like I would make the stuff in any case, like whether anybody
Yep.
saw it or not. But the the payoff for me, I found, is not the, like, you know, having whatever kind of success personally, but the way that it gets me connected with people and keeps me talking and, you know, working with others is the thing that has enriched my life probably the most from this.
Well, Micah, thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll obviously be keeping in touch for
Yes, yes.
many other things. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to get to know this work a lot more deeply and yap about all the other things too. So, yeah, that's about it. You know where to find him, and that's it for this one. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Ready for Mistakes. This series of interviews is entirely self-produced and self-funded and would not be possible without the generosity of guests' time and willingness to participate. If you would like to support the show, I will not take your money, and instead I ask you to subscribe and follow on our various social media profiles, and of course to share it with your friends. Do you want to come on the show and discuss your work? Submit to the form in the show notes and put your name in the hat. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one.